tonight we do not cross a bridge of stone, but a bridge of years. You leave the noise of your world behind and step quietly into the warm, dusty air of a September morning in the 9th century. The year is, let's say, 850. The place is a city that exists in our collective imagination as a myth, a fable of spices and scholars, Baghdad. But this is not the fable yet. This is the real, pulsing, overwhelming thing. You are standing just inside the walls of the round city, Madinat al-Salam, the city of peace, founded by the Abbasid Caliph al-Mansur less than a century before. The scale is what hits you first. The city is a perfect circle, over 1.5 miles in diameter, a geometric assertion of cosmic order imposed upon the banks of the Tigris. Concentric rings of walls, palaces, and markets ripple out from the central Golden Gate Palace like waves from a stone dropped in water. Your feet scuff on packed earth as you join a river of humanity flowing inward. You smell baking bread, animal dung, rose water, and the sharp, coppery scent of a working river. You hear a cacophony that would make a modern stock exchange seem serene. Camel drivers shouting, money changers clinking coins, the call to prayer weaving its melodic thread above the din, and a dozen languages you cannot quite place. A Persian merchant argues in fluent Arabic with a seller of Indian spices. A Greek-looking man in a worn tunic gestures animatedly over a scroll. You are a mote of dust in the capital of the known world, a node in a web of trade routes that stretch from the silk markets of Chang'an to the silver mines of Andalusia. And you, in your 21st century sensibilities, would probably not survive a week here. The water would disagree with you, the politics would confuse you, and the sheer, unmediated intensity of life, the smells, the sounds, the complete lack of personal space, would likely send you into a state of polite but profound shock. But you are here for a specific purpose. You are not here for the spices or the silks, though they are dazzling. You are here for an idea. You are here to find a place that is not quite a university, not quite a library, not quite a monastery scriptorium, but a magnificent hybrid of all three. Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. It is the intellectual engine of this golden age, and you are walking toward its doors. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. This walk is a long one, a quiet one, and it's best taken with a guide who knows when to speak and when to let the silence of history do the talking. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move with the crowd, a silent observer. The grandeur of the city's plan is somewhat obscured by the vibrant, chaotic reality of its streets. The perfect geometry of al-Mansur's vision has been filled in, overgrown, and lived in. You pass the great mosque, its vast courtyard a sea of white robes. You skirt the bustling souk, where the wealth of continents is laid out on mats. Bolts of Egyptian linen, Chinese porcelain, African ivory, and Frankish amber. The air is thick with the dust of 1,000 journeys. You notice the officials, the katibs, scribes, and wazers, viziers, moving with purpose through the throng, their ink-stained fingers and clean robes marking them as men of the pen, not the sword. They are the civil servants of an empire run on paperwork, and their destination is often the same as yours. Historians still argue whether the House of Wisdom was a single, grand building or a more diffuse network of associated libraries and scholarly circles attached to the caliphal palace. The truth is probably the latter, an institution that grew organically from a core. But for our walk, let's imagine a destination. You are drawn toward the caliphal precinct, the innermost circle of power. The crowds thin slightly, the quality of the architecture becomes more refined. The mud brick and wood of the outer city give way to baked brick and marble facades. You follow a quiet arcade, its pillars carved with intricate geometric patterns that seem to shift in the dappled sunlight. The noise of the market fades to a distant hum, replaced by the sound of water trickling in a fountain and, if you strain your ears, a new sound. The soft, persistent scratch of pen on paper, the gentle rustle of vellum, and the low murmur of focused conversation. You have arrived at the threshold of the idea. The gate is before you. The gate you face is not some looming, forbidding portal. It's an elegant arch of baked brick, framed with terracotta tilework in swirling vegetal patterns. The arabesque, a style perfected here, designed to lead the eye on an endless, contemplative path. There is no grandiose sign proclaiming House of Wisdom. Its importance is communicated through understatement and the quality of the guards stationed there. Not brutish thugs, but serious, literate men who look at you with assessing, intelligent eyes. You get the feeling they are less concerned with your weaponry, you have none, and more with your purpose. A nod, and you pass from the sun-drenched arcade into a shaded courtyard. The temperature drops a few pleasant degrees. The first thing that envelops you is the smell. The dry, sweet scent of old paper, the earthy tang of leather bindings, the sharp bite of iron gall ink, and beneath it all, the faint, clean perfume of sandalwood used to polish writing desks and keep insects at bay. It is the smell of concentrated, preserved thought. You are not in a single, vast hall like some cinematic library. You are in a complex. The courtyard is a serene rectangle, with a central fountain whose gentle plash provides a liquid metronome for the work happening around it. Arcades run along all four sides, and within their shaded depths, you see clusters of men, and they are all men. This is a 9th century reality, seated on carpets or low benches. Some are bent in absolute silence over codices, their lips moving soundlessly as they read. Others are in pairs or trios, engaged in hushed but intense discussion, one finger tracing a line in a text, another gesturing to the sky as if referencing a celestial diagram. A young boy, an apprentice, scurries by with a stack of wooden writing boards, careful not to let them clatter. This is the Caliph's grand design, but its roots are older than Islam, older than the Abbasids. You have to understand, the House of Wisdom did not spring from the desert sands fully formed. It is a graft, a deliberate fusion. The model for this kind of Royal Library and Translation Bureau comes from the Persian Sasanian Empire, which the Abbasids overthrew. The Sasanian Shahanshahs had their grand library at Gundashapur, a center of learning that welcomed Nestorian Christian scholars fleeing Byzantine persecution. Al-Mansur, the founder of Baghdad, and his successors, particularly al-Mahdi and Harun al-Rashid, didn't just conquer Persian land, they absorbed Persian administrative genius and their zeal for collecting knowledge. They institutionalized the role of the Sahib Bait al-Hikmah, the keeper of the House of Wisdom, often a scholar of immense repute. So, what you are walking through is not merely a library. It is a Khizanat al-Hikmah, a treasury of wisdom. Think of it less like a public institution and more like the Caliph's exquisite private collection and think tank, funded directly from the imperial purse. Its primary purpose was to augment the glory and power of the Abbasid state by mastering the knowledge of the ancients and the contemporaries. Every book here is a form of geopolitical currency. The translation movement you can feel humming in the air is a state-sponsored project of intellectual appropriation. They are gathering the wisdom of the Greeks, the Persians, the Indians, and the Syriacs, and they are translating it into Arabic, the new lingua franca of empire, science, and God's own revelation. It is an act of supreme confidence, to take all the world's knowledge and claim it, remix it, and make it your own. The very name Bait al-Hikmah might have been a direct lift from a Persian term used for a treasury of precious objects. They weren't just collecting books, they were collecting cognitive jewels. You pause by the fountain, letting the scene settle. A scholar nearby dips a reed pen into an inkwell, his hand moving with quick, assured strokes. He is not writing poetry or copying a ledger. He is annotating a geometry treatise. This is the core of the design, to create a space where the practical, the philosophical, and the divine could be studied under one figurative roof, funded by a ruler who believed that understanding the logic of the universe was a path to understanding its creator, and to governing his creation more effectively. The quiet here isn't the quiet of a tomb, it's the vibrant, focused quiet of a mind, 100 minds, working at full capacity, fueled by the boundless curiosity and deep coffers of the commander of the faithful. Your eye is caught by a doorway leading off the main courtyard, an opening draped with a heavy linen curtain to keep out dust. You push it aside and step into a different kind of space, and the sensory world shifts. The general murmur of debate is gone, replaced by a symphony of precise, small sounds. This is the heart of the operation, the scriptorium and bindery. Light slants in from high, narrow windows, cutting through the fragrant, dusty air to illuminate floating motes of paper fiber and leather dust. Rows of copyists, the Warrakan, sit at sloping desks, their postures a study in disciplined endurance. The dominant sound is the soft, rhythmic scratch of the kalam, a carefully cut reed pen, moving across the surface of freshly made paper. Ah, paper. That's the first thing to understand. The house of wisdom runs on paper, not parchment. Parchment, made from scraped animal skin, is expensive, heavy, and laborious to produce. But paper, a technology learned from Chinese prisoners taken at the Battle of Talas in 751, is revolutionizing this place. It's cheaper, lighter, and can be produced in greater quantities. You see stacks of it, creamy and thick, made from linen rags beaten into pulp in the mills down by the river. This isn't just a change in stationery, it's a change in brain chemistry. More affordable writing material means more copies can be made, knowledge can spread faster, and a scholar's personal library is no longer a fantastical dream of wealth but an attainable reality for the dedicated. You watch a Warwick smooth a sheet with a polished stone before beginning his work, his movements reverent. He's copying a text, but this is not mere transcription. This is art, and it's risk management. His source is a master copy, often loaned from the caliph's own collection or brought from afar at great cost. His job is to replicate it perfectly, but the human hand and eye are fallible. A single missed dot can change the meaning of a crucial word in a medical prescription or a philosophical argument. So, he works with a focused slowness that feels alien in our age of rapid duplication. After finishing a page, he might pass it to a colleague for proofreading. You hear a low voice reading the original text aloud while the proofreader follows along on the copy, his finger tracing each word, his brow furrowed in concentration. Catching an error means scraping the ink off with a knife, a delicate, frustrating operation. The modern aside here is almost too obvious. This is the world before Control Plus Z, and the stakes for a typo could be someone's life if the text was a surgical manual. And then there are the bookbinders. In a corner, their tools are more robust: needles, thread, awls, and boards. Once a stack of copied folios is ready, it is folded, gathered into quires, sewn together with strong linen thread, and then sandwiched between wooden boards often covered in beautifully tooled leather. You see one craftsman impressing an intricate geometric pattern onto a damp leather cover using heated metal stamps. The finished product is a codex, sturdy and portable, a little fortress for the words inside. These men are the unsung engineers of the intellectual revolution. Without their skill, these fragile pages would be loose, disordered, and quickly destroyed. They are creating the physical vessels that will carry Aristotle, Galen, and Euclid across continents and centuries. Some were known to include a tiny secret compartment in the spine or under the end paper, a place to hide a personal note, a valuable leaf of gold, or, in one legend, a map to a hidden treasure, turning the book itself into a literal and figurative keeper of secrets. This room is the human engine of the house. The famous scholars, the superstar translators and astronomers, are the brilliant designers. But these silent men, their hands stained with ink and their clothes smelling of glue and leather, are the assembly line. They are the ones performing the daily, monotonous, utterly vital miracle of preservation. One copy becomes 2, becomes 10. A text that existed as a single, perilously unique manuscript in a monastery in Anatolia or a dusty chest in Kashmir is now multiplied, its survival chances increased 100-fold. Historians still argue whether the primary output of the house was groundbreaking original research or this monumental, systematic work of translation and duplication. The answer, as you feel in this room, is both. The duplication enables the research. You cannot debate the finer points of Aristotelian metaphysics if only one man in the empire has a copy of the book. Here, they are building a critical mass of text, creating the shared foundation upon which new ideas can rise. The scratch of the pen is the sound of a civilization backing up its hard drive. Leaving the mechanical hum of the scriptorium, you drift back into the main courtyard, your ears readjusting to the low tide of scholarly debate. But a particular energy seems to emanate from a shaded corner where a small group is gathered. At its center is a man whose presence changes the air around him. He is the Caliph, Al-Ma'mun. He is not seated on a throne, but on a cushion like the others, though the fineness of his white linen robe and the simple gold band on his head mark his station. He is listening, not speaking, his sharp, intelligent face turned toward an elderly scholar explaining a complex point about the movement of the planets. This is the dream made flesh. While his father, Harun al-Rashid, was the glamorous caliph of 1001 nights, Al-Ma'mun is the true intellectual architect of the house's golden age. His passion is not just a patron's casual hobby, it is an obsession that shapes imperial policy. You learn quickly that Al-Ma'mun's dream has a very specific source, Aristotle. The story goes that the caliph was visited by the philosopher in a dream. Aristotle, serene and solid as marble, sat with him and discussed logic, ethics, and the nature of reality. When Al-Ma'mun awoke, the conviction was bone deep. He must possess, understand, and disseminate the totality of Greek wisdom. This wasn't mere curiosity. For Al-Ma'mun, a follower of the rationalist Mu'tazilite school of theology, Greek logic was the perfect tool to rigorously defend Islamic doctrine. Reason and revelation were two paths to the same divine truth. So, he turned the machinery of the state toward this dream. He didn't just buy books, he launched diplomatic knowledge-gathering expeditions. You hear whispers of his most famous gambit. He supposedly wrote to the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople, not to threaten war or negotiate a treaty, but to formally request access to the ancient Greek scientific manuscripts held in Byzantine monasteries. The emperor, perhaps baffled or disdainful, refused. Al-Ma'mun's response was pure hard power cloaked in scholarly desire. He allegedly made the copying of those manuscripts a condition of a peace treaty. He traded geopolitical concessions for access to library shelves. In another version, his agents simply went, money pouches heavy, and negotiated directly with monks, who were perhaps more tempted by gold than their emperor was by reason. However it happened, the texts began to flow, crates of parchment and papyrus arriving by caravan and ship, filled with the works of Plato, Aristotle, Galen, Ptolemy, and Euclid, often in Syriac or Greek copies so old the scribes handled them like holy relics. But here's the mainstream historical fact that underpins the legend. Al-Ma'mun didn't just collect, he institutionalized. He formalized and massively expanded the translation movement, attracting the greatest minds of the age with immense salaries and, more importantly, with the ultimate prestige, his personal attention. He would debate them, challenge them, and celebrate their successes. A translator wasn't a mere clerk. He was a key operative in the Caliph's grand project to illuminate the world. Al-Ma'mun was also a keen astronomer and an early proponent of the scientific method. He reportedly ordered the construction of 2 large terrestrial hemispheres to check Ptolemy's geographic data and personally oversaw the testing of claims about the circumference of the Earth. This was a ruler who wanted to know, not just own. His dream was of a kingdom governed by light, a chillingly beautiful and wildly ambitious idea. Historians still argue whether Al-Ma'mun's motives were purely intellectual or primarily political, a tool to consolidate his power, legitimize his controversial succession, and outshine the Byzantine rivals in cultural prestige. The truth, as you watch him nod thoughtfully at the astronomer's point, is likely both. The dream was real, and it was useful. The House of Wisdom was his legacy project, a monument not of stone but of mind. And as the discussion wraps up and he rises, his gaze sweeps the courtyard. It doesn't rest on the beautiful architecture or the obedient courtiers. It rests on the books, the scholars, the instruments. It is the look of a man building something he believes will outlast dynasties, a treasury no army could plunder because it existed in the very language and logic of his civilization. For a moment, the political calculations fall away, and you see just the scholar king, standing in the heart of his own magnificent dream. Following the caliph's departure, the courtyard's energy subtly redirects, like iron filings aligning to a new magnet. The focus shifts to a quieter room off the arcade where a single man holds court, not with regal authority, but with the palpable force of concentrated expertise. This is Hunayn ibn Ishaq, the Nestorian Christian physician known as the Sheikh of the translators. He is not merely translating, he is performing a kind of linguistic and intellectual alchemy, and you have a front row seat to the process. He sits at a broad table, surrounded by a constellation of texts. There is the source, a worn Syriac codex of a medical work by Galen, the great Roman era physician. Next to it are 2 Greek versions, borrowed from the caliphal vaults, for cross-checking. Then, several sheets of fresh paper, and a dense, personal notebook filled with his own annotations in a neat, compact script. Hunayn is not working alone. His son, Ishaq, and his nephew, Hubaysh, are with him, a family firm of genius. They are discussing a single, stubborn sentence. The Greek term is ambiguous. The existing Syriac translation is clumsy and loses the nuance of a surgical technique. Hunayn leans back, closing his eyes. He is not just looking for an Arabic word, he is trying to understand Galen's precise intent, to inhabit the mind of a doctor writing centuries earlier and a continent away. This is the method that sets Hunayn apart. He doesn't do word-for-word substitution, a process that produces gibberish. He works concept by concept. He first translates the Greek into his native Syriac, ensuring he has grasped the medical meaning completely. Then, and only then, does he craft the elegant, precise Arabic prose that will become the definitive version for the Islamic world, and later, for medieval Europe. He is, in effect, creating a new technical vocabulary in Arabic. When a term doesn't exist, he coins one, drawing on the language's rich roots to forge a word that is both accurate and aesthetically pleasing. You hear him debate with Ishaq, should we use a large or mudawa for therapy? The first implies a more active curing, the second a process of treatment. Which did Galen mean here? This is scholarship at the molecular level. The mainstream historical fact is that Hunayn and his school were responsible for translating the entire Galenic corpus, over 100 works, along with most of Aristotle, Plato's Republic, and fundamental texts by Hippocrates. His translations became the standard versions for centuries. He was a bibliographic detective. He once traveled to Damascus, Alexandria, and even into Byzantine territory, hunting for a single, complete manuscript of Galen's on anatomical procedures. He would pay exorbitant sums, copy texts personally in dim monastic libraries, and even, the story goes, use his medical skills to treat a Byzantine official in exchange for library access. His translations came with prefaces where he listed all the manuscripts he consulted, critiqued their errors, and explained his editorial choices. He was, in modern terms, publishing his peer review. Now, you see him encounter a real problem. The Greek text describes a nerve. The Syriac version calls it a string. The existing Arabic gloss in the margin says chord. Hunayn is dissatisfied. He calls for an anatomical diagram, a beautiful, detailed drawing on parchment, likely based on dissections. Though human dissection was controversial, animal and limited human study did occur. He points. Look. This is not a chord. It is a conduit for sensation, for movement. It is like a messenger pathway. He taps the page. The word he eventually lands on and popularizes is asab, from a root meaning to be tense or to be irritable, capturing the nerve's sensitivity and its cord-like structure. He has just given Arabic science a precise term for nerve. This is the work, building a language of knowledge, brick by meticulous brick. Historians still argue whether the translation movement was a top-down project driven solely by caliphal decree or a broader social phenomenon fueled by the needs of a rising, multilingual professional class of doctors, engineers, and administrators. Watching Hunayn, you see the answer is both. The caliph provided the patronage and the prestige, but the engine was men like this, a Christian working in Arabic, using Syriac and Greek, driven by a personal, almost obsessive commitment to accuracy. His work wasn't just archival, it was immediately practical. The corrected Galenic text his finalizing will be used to train surgeons in Baghdad's hospitals next week. The scratch of his kalam is directly linked to the steadier hand of a physician setting a bone. He is not just preserving the past, he is actively constructing the intellectual toolkit for the future, one perfectly chosen word at a time. The intensity of Hunayn's lexical laboratory gives way to a different quality of light and thought as you move into a smaller, sun-drenched courtyard next to the main complex. Here, the sound is not debate, but the soft, rhythmic tapping of a counting board and the whisper of a pen tracing numbers and strange, elegant symbols on a large sheet of paper. The man at work is Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, and the text he is drafting will travel so far and embed itself so deeply in global thought that his name will become a word, algorithm. His workspace is a model of orderly abstraction, a stark contrast to the sprawling textual archaeology of the translation rooms. He is writing Kitab al-Muqteza fi Hisab al-Jaba w al-Muqabala, the compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing. You watch as he lays out a problem, not in words, but in a new, symbolic language he is helping to invent. A square and 10 of its roots equal 39 units, he writes. He isn't thinking of a plot of land or a pile of coins anymore. He is thinking of the pure relationship between shapes and numbers. The thing or the root, shay, is what we would call *x star. The square, mal, is x squared. His great genius, building on Indian and earlier Greek work, is to systematize. He is creating a step-by-step procedure, an algorithm, for solving these equations. Al-Jaba, the act of restoring balance by adding the same quantity to both sides. Al-Muqabala, the act of simplification by subtracting identical terms from both sides. This is not just math. It is a legal proceeding for numbers, a way of bringing order to quantitative chaos. The mainstream historical fact is monumental. Al-Khwarizmi's text introduced the decimal positional number system, the Hindu-Arabic numerals we use today, 0, 1, 2, 3, to the Islamic world and, through later Latin translations, to Europe. His name, Latinized as algorithmi, came to mean any systematic procedure of calculation. But let's focus on the quiet moment of creation you're witnessing. He pauses, looking at the equation. He's not just solving for one specific square and root. He is proving a general solution, a formula that will work for any numbers you plug into it. He is moving mathematics from the realm of the particular, of story problems about inheritance and land division, into the realm of the abstract and universal. This shift is as profound as the move from describing specific trees to formulating the concept of photosynthesis. Al-Khwarizmi wasn't just a theoretical mathematician. He was a munajjim, an astronomer-astrologer, employed in the caliph's service. A lot of his computational drive came from intensely practical needs: calculating prayer times, determining the direction of Mecca, Qibla, from any location, plotting lunar months, and casting horoscopes for the royal court. His math had to work in the real, spinning world. It's said he was part of the team that measured the length of a degree of latitude to refine Ptolemy's geography. So the sublime abstraction of algebra was born, in part, from the need to know when to pray and which way to kneel. There's a beautiful humility in that. He finishes the geometric proof for his problem, drawing a neat square and rectangles to visualize the equation. It's elegant, logical, and complete. This visualization is key. He isn't relying on mystical numerology. He is using demonstrable geometric truth to back up his arithmetic rules. He closes the section and moves on to another topic, calculating areas and volumes. His pen flows, describing the formula for the area of a circle, the volume of a pyramid. This is the other half of his project, providing the tools for the administrators, the engineers, muhandisin, the tax collectors, and the architects who are building the irrigation canals, domes, and market regulations of the empire. His book is a manual for running a complex civilization. Historians still argue whether Al-Khwarizmi's primary contribution was his synthesis and transmission of Indian and Greek knowledge or his genuinely novel steps toward algebraic abstraction. Watching him connect the geometric diagram to the algorithmic rule, you see it is the synthesis that enables the novelty. He has gathered pieces of a puzzle from different cultures, but the picture he assembles is new. He is creating a language of analysis that will allow future scholars to ask questions they couldn't even formulate before. In this sunny corner, away from the theological debates and the medical emergencies, a quieter, more fundamental revolution is taking place. He is teaching the world a new way to think, not just to calculate, but to generalize, to balance, to solve for the unknown. He is writing the operating system. The abstract, sunlit world of Al-Khwarizmi's numbers dissolves as you are drawn toward a different kind of ascent. You follow a narrow, spiraling stone staircase built into one of the fortified walls of the palace complex. The air grows cooler, the sounds of the courtyard fade to a distant murmur, and with each step, your horizon expands. You emerge onto the roof of a high tower, the city's wind catching your clothes. This is the observatory, the Razad. It is not a dome with a telescope, that instrument is centuries in the future, but an open platform cluttered with human-scale instruments of profound ingenuity. Here, the quest for knowledge turns its face literally upward, and the scale of ambition is cosmic. You have joined a team of astronomers, the Munajjimin, led by men like Habash al-Hazib and the young, brilliant al-Battani. They are in the midst of a multi-year project, checking, correcting, and ultimately surpassing Ptolemy's Almagest, the ancient Greek Bible of the heavens. The work is achingly slow, governed by the patient turn of the earth. One scholar squints through the sight of a massive brass quadrant, its arc carefully graded into degrees and minutes, tracking the sun's ascent toward noon. Another tends to a delicate astrolabe, its intricate web of brass fretwork, the rete, a star map frozen in metal, which he aligns with the pole star. A third consults a clepsydra, a water clock, marking time with a steady drip. Their goal is not just to map the stars, but to measure the universe with new precision. The mainstream historical fact being forged here is the refinement of astronomical parameters that will stand for centuries. They are recalculating the length of the solar year, the precession of the equinoxes, the obliquity of the ecliptic, and the paths of the planets. Al-Battani's observations will be so accurate that Copernicus will cite him over 500 years later. But the work is gritty. You see a junior observer rubbing his eyes, weary from a night spent staring at the slow drift of the moon against a fixed backdrop of stars, calling out readings to a scribe. This is science's marathon, not sprint. Among their tools might have been a shadow square, or a giant meridian ring used to measure solar altitude. Some later Islamic observatories, like the great one at Maraga, would even feature massive mural quadrants fixed into the foundation, instruments so large they became part of the architecture, because size reduced the margin of error. Here in Baghdad, the instruments are portable, but the intent is just as monumental. The discussion you overhear is not about poetry or law, but about evidence. An older astronomer, pointing to a pile of wax tablets covered in numbers, argues that their observations of Mars do not match Ptolemy's model perfectly. The Greek system of epicycles and deferents, circles upon circles used to explain planetary retrograde motion, seems clunky, a mathematical fudge to save the appearances. The model is complex beyond necessity, he grumbles. This is a heresy against ancient authority, spoken softly in the wind. They aren't ready to throw out the geocentric model, but the seed of dissatisfaction is planted. They are finding that the heavens, for all their divine perfection, are messy in their details. Their job is to clean up the math. And then there is the other, more famous project initiated by Al-Mamun, measuring the Earth itself. You hear the plan being discussed. The theory, inherited from the Greeks like Eratosthenes, is sound. Measure the angle of the Sun at 2 points on the same meridian, a north-south line, a known distance apart. Use trigonometry to calculate the circumference. Teams were dispatched to the plain of Sinjar and another location in the desert. They used wooden rods and calibrated chains to measure the distance, and large astrolabes to measure the sun's angle. Historians still argue whether their famous result, approximately 41,000 kilometers, an overestimate but in the right ballpark, was a triumph of logistics or contained a compensating error in their distance measurement. But the ambition is what takes your breath away. On this rooftop, they are not just charting the sky, they are sizing up their own planet. They are proving that the world could be comprehended, quantified, and known through careful observation and geometry. The dome of heaven is being brought down to earth, one precise measurement at a time. Descending from the celestial concerns of the observatory, you return to the earthly realities that make such lofty pursuits possible. You find yourself near the administrative quarters of the house, where the sublime meets the ledger. Here, the currency is not just ideas, but actual currency. You overhear a conversation that would sound bizarre in any other context. A scholar, looking both proud and slightly embarrassed, is receiving payment from a caliphal clerk. The clerk is not counting out coins from a purse. He is weighing them. On a small, precise scale, he places a stack of golden dinars, and in the other pan, he places the finished, bound translation the scholar has just delivered. The goal is equilibrium. The scholar is being paid his weight in gold, or rather, his book's weight in gold. This is the famous, almost mythical payment system of the House of Wisdom, and it's a perfect symbol of the Abbasid valuation of knowledge. The story goes that Hunayn ibn Shak was paid literally in gold, the scales tipping in his favor for the density of his work. Whether every transaction was quite this literal is debated, but the principle was clear. Translation was not a hobby. It was high-value labor worthy of spectacular reward. A top translator like Hunayn could become wealthy beyond the dreams of most merchants. This created a powerful economic incentive, drawing the sharpest minds from across the empire and beyond. It turned intellectual labor into a prestigious, lucrative career path. You weren't just a scholar, you were a knowledge entrepreneur on the caliph's payroll. Imagine the variables. Was it the weight of the final, beautiful codex with its wooden boards and leather binding? Or just the loose folios? Did the quality of the parchment or paper affect the rate? What if you translated a short but incredibly dense and important philosophical treatise like Aristotle's Categories? Did you get less gold than the translator of a long, rambling commentary? The system seems blunt, but it likely existed within a framework of negotiated fees, where the difficulty of the source material and the translator's reputation factored in. It was probably less a strict pound-for-pound rule and more a magnificent PR stunt, a symbolic act that declared, "Your work is literally as valuable as gold." The modern aside writes itself. It's the 9th century equivalent of a superstar tech CEO getting paid in stock options, a direct share in the valuation of the project. This lavish patronage was funded by the staggering wealth of the Abbasid Caliphate, which sat astride the global trade routes. The gold came from Nubia, silver from the Andes, via complex trade networks, and gems from India. The state coffers, filled by taxes, tariffs, and war spoils, were redirected into this project of soft power. A mainstream historical fact is that this created a true knowledge economy within Baghdad. It supported not just the translators, but an entire ecosystem: paper makers, ink makers, book binders, copyists, librarians, instrument makers, and even the servants who kept the lamps burning during long nights of study. The House of Wisdom was a major employer. Its economic impact rippled through the city's markets, creating demand for specific goods and services. The price of high-quality linen rags for paper probably went up. Yet, this system was not without its tensions. You can imagine the jealousies. A physician translating a practical manual on surgery, vital for saving lives, might watch a philosopher translating a speculative work of metaphysics walk away with a heavier bag of gold. Historians still argue whether this flood of gold led to rushed, lower-quality work as some translators aimed for bulk over precision, or whether the prestige and competition ensured consistently high standards. Watching the clerk carefully adjust the scales, you sense it was probably a mix. The system attracted both genuine geniuses and savvy opportunists. But the overall effect was undeniable. It created a gold rush for Greek thought, a frenzy of acquisition and translation that, for a few glorious decades, made Baghdad the absolute center of the intellectual world. The message was clear. In this city, under this caliph, the smartest thing you could do with your life was to think, write, and translate. And you would be paid, quite literally, in weighty, tangible glory. The transaction with the gold concludes, and the rewarded scholar, clutching his payment, doesn't head for the city gates to celebrate. He instead moves toward a side chamber where a simple meal of bread, dates, and spiced lentils is being laid out on a long cloth on the floor. The day is structured, and you are now flowing into its later rhythms. The intense, solitary focus of the morning, the copying, the translating, the calculating, gives way to the collective, social engine of the afternoon: debate, teaching, and the cross-pollination of ideas. This is where the House of Wisdom truly lives, not in its books, but in the conversations between them. You join the gathering, sitting at the periphery. The meal is frugal, eaten quickly. The real sustenance is about to begin. A senior scholar, a faqih, jurist, known for his sharp wit, clears a space and poses a question to the mixed assembly of translators, astronomers, physicians, and philosophers. If a man dreams of a mathematical proof, and upon waking writes it down perfectly, who is the author? His sleeping soul or his waking mind? The question is a playful key that unlocks a serious discussion about the nature of intellect, revelation, and memory. A physician jumps in, citing Galen on the humors affecting the brain during sleep. An Aristotelian scholar counters with the theory of the active intellect. The debate is polite but pointed, a verbal fencing match where the score is kept in logical parries and citations of authority. This is how reputations are made and tested. A young man, new to the circle, offers a halting but insightful analogy to the translation process itself. The dream as a text in one language, the waking mind as its translator. A murmur of approval runs through the group. He has just earned a place. This is the daily curriculum. After the structured work comes the unstructured, but vital, dialectic. You witness different circles forming. In one corner, a geometrician uses a stick to draw diagrams in the dust of the courtyard, explaining a new solution for trisecting an angle to a group of engineers. In another, a poet who is also a court official debates the aesthetics of Arabic prose style with Hunayn's nephew, arguing that a translation must be not only accurate but beautiful to truly live in the language. The mainstream historical fact embodied here is the deeply interdisciplinary nature of Abbasid scholarship. There were no hard borders between science, philosophy, theology, and literature. A man could be, and often was, a physician, a philosopher, a poet, and a courtier. This fluidity allowed ideas to migrate freely. A concept from logic could refine legal theory. A medical observation could influence a philosophical argument about the soul. They were known to be fueled by a specific drink, sherbet, not the frozen dessert, but a cool, sweetened water often infused with rose, violet, or crushed pistachio, sipped from small ceramic cups. It was the caffeine of its day, a delicate refreshment to keep the mind sharp during hours of talk. Furthermore, the etiquette was precise. You waited for your elder to finish speaking. You addressed points, not personalities. The most cutting insult was not to call someone a fool, but to demonstrate that he had misunderstood a fundamental text. These were battles fought with parchment shields and pen swords. And they could get heated. Stories tell of debates that lasted days, with scholars retreating to consult their libraries overnight only to return the next morning with a new barrage of citations. As the afternoon light slants long, the topics deepen. The playful question gives way to a serious one posed by the jurist. Does God create human actions, or does man have free will to choose? This is the core of the Mu'tazilite theological debate that Al-Ma'mun championed, and it electrifies the room. The Greek concepts of necessity and contingency, freshly translated from Aristotle, are now wielded as tools to dissect Islamic doctrine. You see the thrilling, and to some, terrifying, consequence of the translation project. It isn't just adding to knowledge, it's challenging and reshaping existing belief systems from within. Historians still argue whether these debates were largely confined to elite circles or had a broader impact on society. Sitting in this room, feeling the intellectual voltage, you sense they were the cutting edge, the laboratory where the future of Islamic thought was being stress-tested. The day that began with solitary pen strokes ends in a chorus of clashing, brilliant voices, all trying to describe a world that was suddenly, thanks to the books lining the walls, infinitely larger and more complex than they had ever imagined. After the cerebral storm of the debate, you are drawn to a quieter room where the work is more visual, more about synthesis than argument. Here, the world is being literally redrawn. You have entered the mapmaker's room. On a large, tilting table, a team is piecing together a new vision of the Earth, a massive parchment being inked with coastlines, mountains, and the snaking paths of rivers. This is not art for art's sake, it is a strategic tool, and it represents the ultimate fusion of the house's resources, Greek theory meeting Islamic travelogue. The master cartographer, likely a scholar like Al-Khwarizmi himself, who also wrote a book of the description of the Earth, is consulting a battered copy of Ptolemy's geography. But he is not copying it slavishly. He has other, more recent sources spread around him. The Risala, accounts of Muslim merchants who have sailed the Indian Ocean, and the Silk Road itineraries of diplomats and pilgrims. An older man with the weathered face of a sailor points to a section of the Indian coast, describing a bay that Ptolemy missed. "It is here," he insists, his finger tapping a blank space on the parchment. 5 days' sail from the River of Pearls. The cartographer nods, makes a note, and his assistant, with a fine-tipped brush, begins to extend the coastline, creating a new bump on the edge of the known world. This is the mainstream historical work, the creation of the Kitab Surat al-Ard, Book of the Picture of the Earth, tradition. These maps, with their south-up orientation and distinctive Kufic script, would influence Islamic geography for centuries. They integrated Ptolemy's grid of latitudes and longitudes, a revolutionary system of mathematical location, with actual, empirical data from travelers. They corrected the Greeks' overestimate of the size of the Indian Ocean and his landlocked rendering of the Caspian Sea. Africa begins to take a more recognizable shape. The vastness of Asia starts to be acknowledged. The map is a living document, a wiki in parchment, constantly updated with new reports. They often included what scholars call entertaining geography, notes and small illustrations in the margins or in vast, unexplored regions. You might see a tiny elephant in the south of Africa, a phoenix in the Far East, or a note near the northern edges reading, "Here are lands of perpetual darkness and the wall of Gog and Magog." These weren't necessarily believed as literal fact by the cartographers. They were a way of encoding folklore, travelers' tales, and theological concepts into the document. They marked the limits of certain knowledge. The blank spaces were filled with wonders, a visual admission that for all their learning, the world still held mysteries that defied grid lines. It was science and storytelling sharing the same page. You watch as they tackle a specifically Islamic problem, determining the Qibla, the direction of prayer toward Mecca, from any given city. This is a problem of spherical trigonometry, and it's deadly serious. A mosque built facing the wrong direction is a theological and community failure. The cartographers use their growing network of coordinates. They know the latitude and longitude of Mecca, as best they can calculate it, and of, say, Cordoba in Andalusia. Using sign tables and geometric calculations developed by astronomers, they can compute the Great Circle direction. This practical, devotional need drove mathematical innovation as powerfully as any abstract pursuit. The map is thus also a prayer mat, a tool for aligning an entire civilization in its daily worship. Historians still argue whether these maps were primarily used for practical navigation by merchants and pilgrims or were mostly symbolic displays of imperial knowledge and power, a way for the caliph to visually possess the world he claimed to rule. Looking at the intense focus of the cartographer as he inks in a new trade route reported by a Persian traveler, you see it is both. The map is a strategic asset for commerce and war, and it is a breathtaking declaration that the Abbasid mind could comprehend and order the entire creation. Every corrected coastline is a small victory over ignorance, a step toward a world that is knowable, measurable, and navigable. In this room, the abstract curves of the celestial spheres studded on the rooftop are being flattened onto parchment, turning philosophy into a guide for the journey. The precise, inked lines of the mapmaker's world fade as you return to the main courtyard, now washed in the softer, golden light of late afternoon. The social ferment has coalesced into a more formal gathering under a grand, pointed arch. This is not a free-for-all debate, but a structured majlis, a council. The topic, which hangs in the air like incense smoke, is the very one that electrified the earlier casual circle, now elevated to a high-stakes discourse: human free will versus divine predestination. On one side sits a proponent of the rationalist Mu'tazilite school, championed by Caliph al-Ma'mun. On the other, a traditionist scholar who grounds his arguments firmly in the transmitted texts of the Quran and Hadith, wary of the invasive logic of Greek philosophy. You are witnessing the direct, and sometimes dangerous, consequence of translating Aristotle. The Mu'tazilite scholar speaks with calm, analytical force. He uses terms like justice and rational necessity. If God is just, he argues, how can he punish humans for actions they were compelled to do? Therefore, humans must have been granted a faculty of choice, a rational soul that can discern and elect. He draws subtly on Aristotelian concepts of causality and potentiality. His opponent listens, his expression a mask of polite skepticism. When he replies, his voice is not one of logic, but of authority and tradition. He quotes Quranic verses about God as the sole creator of all things. Does not the verse say, God leads astray whom he wills and guides whom he wills? He asks. To claim a sphere of action outside of God's ultimate creation is to limit his power. His argument is a fortress built from revelation. This is the mainstream historical schism that the House of Wisdom helped ignite. The Mu'tazilites, empowered by caliphal patronage and armed with Greek dialectical tools, sought to use reason to defend and explain doctrine. Their opponents, who would later crystallize into more traditionalist schools, saw this as a corruption of pure faith by foreign, human reasoning. The debate you're watching is not academic, it's political theology. Al-Ma'mun had instituted a brutal minna, an inquisition, forcing judges and scholars to publicly profess the Mu'tazilite doctrine that the Quran was created in time, not co-eternal with God, a position meant to protect God's absolute unity, Tawhid. The shadow of that coercion lingers in the polite tension of this majlis. A man's career, his freedom, could hinge on how he argued here. The mode of argument followed strict rules of adab, polite comportment. You did not shout. You used elaborate, respectful honorifics even for your intellectual adversary. The most devastating critique was often delivered with a gentle smile and a phrase like, "May God guide you to understanding." It was a duel fought with poisoned courtesy. Scholars would have stacks of their own books and key manuscripts beside them, ready to be consulted and quoted verbatim to support a point. The rustle of turning vellum was a tactical sound. And they drank copious amounts of water or sherbet, their voices needing to hold out for hours. The physical endurance was part of the contest. As the debate wears on, you see the fundamental clash of worldviews. The rationalist is trying to build a systematic theology where God acts according to discernible principles of justice and reason. The traditionist sees this as imprisoning the divine will in a human-made cage of logic. The imported concepts from Athens are grating against the bedrock of Medina. Historians still argue whether the translation movement ultimately strengthened Islamic thought by providing new intellectual tools or destabilized it by introducing unresolvable philosophical tensions that led to sectarian division. In this moment, under the arch, it is doing both simultaneously. It is strengthening the rigor of discourse while exposing a fault line. The House of Wisdom, for all its glory, was not a neutral space. It was the epicenter of an intellectual earthquake, one whose tremors would reshape the religious landscape for centuries. The very tools it forged to understand the universe were now being used to question the nature of God and man, and there was no easy answer in any of the thousands of books lining its walls. The theological tension of the Majlis leaves a certain charged silence in its wake as the scholars disperse. In the quieter moments that follow, as lamps are lit against the encroaching dusk, you catch the tail end of a different kind of story. It's not about ideas, but about power. Two older copyists, their hands stained with the day's ink, are speaking in hushed tones as they clean their pens. One mentions a name that seems to carry a chill with it, the Barmakids. The word is spoken with a mix of awe and profound caution. It refers not to a scholar, but to a family of Persian viziers, the Barmakid family, who were the indispensable architects of the early Abbasid state and, by extension, the early nurturing force behind the House of Wisdom itself. Their story is the shadow that proves the sunlight, a reminder that this entire edifice of knowledge was built on the precarious sands of political favor. You piece the tale together from the whispers. The Barmakids, originally Buddhist priests from Balkh, converted to Islam and rose to become the supreme administrators for Caliphs al-Mansur, al-Mahdi, and Harun al-Rashid. For decades, they were the empire's chief executives. The treasury, the military, the diplomacy all flowed through their capable hands. They were also immense patrons of learning, poetry, and the arts. It was under their watch and with their resources that the translation movement first gained serious momentum. They sponsored scholars, collected books, and established the administrative culture of valuing the written word. In many ways, they laid the foundation upon which Al-Mamun's more famous House of Wisdom was built. They were the godfathers of the Golden Age. Then comes the twist, the shocking, fringe tidbit that became a legend across the Muslim world. In 803, at the height of their power and fame, Harun al-Rashid suddenly, brutally, turned on them. He executed the head of the family, Ja'far ibn Yahya, imprisoned the others, and confiscated their colossal wealth. The fall was so sudden and complete it spawned 1,000 theories and stories. Was it jealousy? A political plot? A personal slight involving Harun's sister, whom Ja'far may have been too close to? The whispers you hear suggest all of these and none. The most enduring lesson was about the nature of power in the Abbasid court. No one, no matter how brilliant, wealthy, or indispensable, was safe from the caliph's whim. The Barmakids had built the machinery of state, and with a snap of his fingers, Harun demonstrated he could dismantle it and them. This event casts a long shadow over the House of Wisdom. It is a mainstream historical fact that this patronage was always personal, not institutional. The house existed at the pleasure of the caliph. Al-Mamun's passionate support was its lifeblood, but what of the next caliph? The Barmakid saga was a stark lesson that the rivers of gold could dry up overnight, that a vizier or scholar who climbed too high could plummet just as fast. It injected a note of existential anxiety into the very marble of the place. The scholars here, for all their lofty debates, were ultimately clients, their security dependent on the stability and interests of one man. It made the work urgent. They had to achieve as much as they could, now, because the window of opportunity might slam shut without warning. Historians still argue whether the fall of the Barmakids was a specific political event or a symbolic turning point marking the end of early Abbasid openness and the beginning of a more autocratic, less cosmopolitan era. Listening to the copyist's whispers, you feel it as both. The specific tragedy of one family became a parable for every ambitious man in Baghdad. The shadow they cast is one of impermanence. It whispers that all this, the books, the debates, the algorithms, the star charts, is breathtakingly fragile, sustained not by a permanent endowment or a societal contract, but by the fleeting passion of princes and the treacherous loyalty of kings. The lamps now flicker in the courtyard, pushing back the darkness. But the story of the Barmakids is a reminder of how quickly, and how completely, that light could be snuffed out. The story of the Barmakids, a tale of political lightning, makes you look at the walls of the house with new eyes. You are no longer just seeing a library or a think tank. You are looking at a vast, distributed arc. The true, monumental success of this place is not in the brilliant new theories it spawned, though there were many, but in a quieter, more profound act, the Great Rescue. Before the ink dried on the last translation commissioned by Al-Mamun, the scholars here were engaged in a race against time, a race against the decay of parchment, the burnings of wars, the neglect of ages, and the simple, vast indifference of the past. They were saving ancient knowledge from oblivion by the only means possible, copying it onto a new, more durable medium, paper, and in a new, rising language, Arabic. Think of the chain of transmission, so fragile. A text by Aristotle, written on papyrus in 4th century BC Athens. A single copy survives, maybe in the library of Alexandria. It gets copied onto parchment by a Byzantine monk in 6th century Constantinople. That copy, now unique, travels to a Syriac Christian monastery in Mesopotamia, where it's translated. That Syriac version is what finally reaches Baghdad. At every step, the thread is one fire, one flood, one puritanical book burning away from snapping. The House of Wisdom's project was to take that single, trembling thread and spin it into a rope, a net, a whole safety blanket of copies. You see it in the scriptorium, but now you understand the scale. They weren't just copying for distribution, they were copying for species survival. Every time a Warwick finished a page of Galen's on the usefulness of the parts, he wasn't just doing a job, he was pulling a priceless, intangible passenger from a sinking ship onto a newer, sturdier vessel. The mainstream historical fact is staggering. The Arabic translations produced in Baghdad and other centers like it became the primary vessels through which the lion's share of Greek science and philosophy survived into the modern world. When Europe re-engaged with this legacy during the Renaissance, it often did so through Latin translations of the Arabic translations. The original Greek texts for many works had vanished in the West. Those precious, often unique Greek and Syriac manuscripts, in many cases, after being translated, they were set aside, stored, and eventually lost. The Arabic version became the canonical text. The house succeeded so completely in its act of preservation and transference that it sometimes made its own sources obsolete, consigning them to the dust from which it had saved their souls. It was the ultimate in successful platform migration. This work of preservation was an active, critical process, not passive hoarding. As you saw with Hunayn, they compared manuscripts, corrected errors, and wrote commentaries. They weren't putting fossils in a museum, they were taking a dormant seed and planting it in fertile new soil, ensuring it would grow. A text of Euclid's Elements copied here wasn't a relic. It was a working manual, its diagrams redrawn, its proofs debated, its concepts applied by engineers. The ink of preservation was also the ink of activation. They saved the knowledge by making it live again, by arguing with it, improving upon it, and teaching it to a new generation in a new tongue. Historians still argue whether this massive effort of preservation came at the cost of stifling original creative thought, whether the Abbasids were more brilliant librarians than innovators. Walking through the rooms now, seeing the astronomer correcting Ptolemy, the mathematician generalizing algebra, the theologian wrestling with imported philosophy, you see the dichotomy is false. The preservation created the conditions for the innovation. You cannot innovate in a vacuum. By saving and consolidating the knowledge of the ancients, they gave their own brightest minds a higher platform from which to leap. The ink that preserved Aristotle was the same ink that would later be used by Ibn Sina, Avicenna, to write a medical encyclopedia that synthesized and surpassed Galen, or by Ibn al-Haytham to revolutionize optics. The rescue mission was the necessary prelude to the Golden Age. The soft, relentless scratching of pens in this complex is the sound of a civilization building its memory, ensuring it would have a past to build its future upon. The memory, so carefully built, now faces its fire. The year in your mind's eye melts and reforms. It is no longer the serene 9th century. The air you breathe is thick, not with dust, but with smoke and terror. The date is 1258. You are no longer a calm observer in a functioning house of wisdom. You are a phantom in a city being systematically dismantled. The Mongols, led by Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis, are at the gates, and then through them. The sophisticated irrigation canals that made Baghdad a paradise are being destroyed, the libraries are burning, and the Tigris, that lifeblood of the city, is changing color. You stand, helpless, in the final moments. Scholars, those who haven't already fled or been killed, are in a panic. Some try to hide precious codices, stuffing them into wells or burying them in clay jars. Others, in a final act of devotion, simply clutch their most beloved books to their chests, as if the words themselves could form a shield. The Mongol soldiers, for whom a book is just an oddly shaped block of fuel, storm the libraries. They don't see a treasury of wisdom, they see heretical scrolls and convenient kindling. Parchment and paper burn quickly, with a bright, hungry flame. They tear the bindings for the gold thread, throw the wooden boards on fires, and cast the written pages into the streets. The great dye works of Baghdad are said to have run with blood, but the more haunting, symbolic image is of the Tigris. This leads to the mainstream, heartbreaking historical fact. The siege ended with a massacre of unimaginable scale and the near-total destruction of Baghdad's libraries, including the House of Wisdom. The stories say that so many books were thrown into the Tigris that the river ran black with ink, and you could cross it on the bridge of drowned knowledge. The Mongols used the books as stepping stones. It's an image of such profound cultural violence it takes your breath away, the literal drowning of thought. Some tales claim the sheer volume of parchment and paper clogged the river and poisoned the water for months, a fitting metaphor for how the destruction of knowledge can choke the life from a civilization. Whether the ink truly blackened the river is poetically true, if not hydrologically precise. It represents the extinguishing of a light. You witness a specific, final act. An elderly scholar, his face streaked with soot and tears, stands on a balcony overlooking the chaos. He holds a thick volume, maybe a copy of Al-Khwarizmi's algebra, maybe Hunayn's translation of Galen. He watches a soldier below torch a pile of manuscripts. He doesn't try to run. Instead, he opens the book to a random page, his lips moving in a silent recitation of its contents. Then, with a cry that is equal parts grief and defiance, he hurls the book out into the air, over the balcony, toward the river. It doesn't fly far. It arcs down and is lost in the smoke and madness. It was never going to make it to the water. It was a gesture, a final, futile act of setting an idea free because its physical vessel was doomed. It is the moment the music stops. Historians still argue whether the Mongol destruction was the absolute, final end of the House of Wisdom as an institution or whether it was a death blow to a place whose peak had already passed, its energy dispersed to other centers like Cairo, Cordoba, and Moraga. Standing in the smoke, it feels like an end. The physical space is being annihilated. But the debate of the historians hints at the strange afterlife of ideas. The house, as a building, is gone. Its books are ash or pulp. But the knowledge? The algorithms, the medical texts, the star charts, the philosophical concepts? They had already escaped. They were already in other books, in other libraries, in the minds of scholars who had traveled. They were sailing west to Sicily and Toledo, being translated into Latin and Hebrew. The Mongols could burn the Ark, but they were too late to drown all the passengers. The ink that blackened the Tigris was also a stain of permanence. It had already been absorbed into the bloodstream of human history. The fire of 1258 is an ending so catastrophic it feels like a full stop. But in the grand, messy manuscript of history, it is only a semicolon, followed by a desperate, fragmented, but continuing sentence. The acrid smoke of 1258 fades, not into nothingness, but into the cool, climate-controlled air of a modern museum gallery. You are no longer in the House of Wisdom, but you are surrounded by its ghosts. You stand in the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, or perhaps a quiet wing of a museum in London or Berlin. The case before you holds fragments. A fired clay tablet with cuneiform script, a delicate astrolabe of tarnished brass, a single, illuminated page from a Quran, its gold leaf still blazing after 1,000 years. These objects are survivors. They were buried, looted, lost, traded, excavated, and finally placed here under glass. They are the echoes. Your long walk through the idea of the house has brought you here, to its physical, fractured remains. You look at the astrolabe. Its reed is a delicate web, a frozen snapshot of a 10th century sky as seen from Baghdad. You can almost see the scholar on the rooftop, turning it in his hands, aligning it with the pole star to calculate the time of the evening prayer. This one instrument connects the observatory to the mosque, the abstract cosmos to the daily ritual. In another case is a medical manuscript, open to a page illustrating the human eye. The drawing is schematic but precise, based on the anatomical knowledge preserved from Galen and refined by Ibn Sina. The ink is faded, but the understanding it represents is still clear, a direct lineage from the house's scriptorium to modern ophthalmology. These are not just artifacts, they are hyperlinks to a lost world, waiting for a viewer to click on them and be transported. This is the mainstream reality of the legacy. It is scattered and contested. The physical heritage of the Abbasid Golden Age was not only burned by the Mongols but later plundered by colonial archaeologists, sold on the antiquities market, and tragically looted during the chaos of the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The objects you see are the lucky ones, the ones that were catalogued and protected. Their very presence in a museum speaks of both preservation and dislocation. Some of the most important objects survive in a form the original scholars would find baffling: digital scans. The Qatar Digital Library and other projects are now putting high-resolution images of these manuscripts online, making them more accessible now than they have been at any point in the last 800 years. The knowledge, after its journey from papyrus to parchment to paper, now lives as pixels, a new kind of preservation the Warrakan could never have imagined. But the most profound echo is not in the glass cases. It's in the language you use every day. Words like algebra, algorithm, azimuth, zenith, alchemy, alkali, sherbet, sofa, mattress, magazine. These are all Arabic words that entered European languages, often carrying the concepts they described with them. They are linguistic fossils of the great transfer of knowledge. When you solve for *x*, you are using Al-Khwarizmi's thing, shay. When a doctor checks a retina, they are using a term shaped by the Arabic translations of Galen. The House of Wisdom's project of translating the world into Arabic ultimately resulted in Arabic itself being translated into the world's intellectual vocabulary. The legacy is embedded in the very syntax of global science. Historians still argue whether the Islamic Golden Age was a unique, discrete period or part of a longer, continuous thread of human intellectual endeavor that simply found a particularly fertile home in Baghdad for a few centuries. Looking at the astrolabe, you feel the latter is true. The house was not an alien monolith. It was a brilliant, temporary confluence, a router that received the data packets of antiquity, prevented their corruption, and rebroadcast them on a stronger signal. Its walls are gone, but its network effect persists. Your walk ends here, not with a grand conclusion, but with a quiet acknowledgement of resonance. The search for knowledge, the act of translation, the desperate drive to preserve and understand, these are not Abbasid inventions, they are human imperatives. The House of Wisdom was just one of our species' most beautiful, ambitious, and fragile attempts to answer that call. The lights in the museum are low. The objects sleep in their cases. But the ideas they contain are still awake, still traveling, still looking for a mind to light up, just as they did on that warm morning in the City of Peace, over 1,000 years ago. And so, our walk comes to a gentle close, not at the end of a path, but at the edge of a quiet understanding. The frantic energy of the scriptorium, the heated debates under the arch, the silent, patient gaze from the observatory roof, all of it settles now into a soft hum in the memory, like the fading note of a distant bell. We witness the gathering of light, a brilliant, concentrated beam of human curiosity that shone for a glorious while before the winds of history scattered its embers across the globe. It's easy to feel a pang for what was lost in the smoke and the blackened waters, for the specific, tangible beauty of that place and time. But the true comfort, the deep reassurance, lies in realizing that the project itself never really ended. The work of the house, the preservation, the translation, the stubborn pursuit of a clearer picture of this universe, simply changed address. It moved to other libraries, other laboratories, other minds. It lives on in every textbook that explains an equation, in every library that guards a collection, in every quiet moment of study where one person seeks to understand the work of another across the centuries. The scholars of Baghdad, with their gold dust ink and their star chart brass, were our colleagues in this endless, shared human endeavor. They passed the torch, and though the flame flickered, it never went out. So, as you drift towards sleep, let the image be not of a final, drowning book, but of a single, saved page, carried on a breeze from that old courtyard, its words still legible, its meaning still clear, finding a home in the vast and waiting library of the future. The journey of knowledge has no terminus, only waypoints. Baghdad was one of the most magnificent. Rest now, knowing the walk continues.